Section 20 of Clarence Darrow Selected Works, 1893 to 1917. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Section 19, Darrow's Plea, Part 2. For God's sake, Ford, if you are ever made district attorney in this county, if you are able to climb up the ladder of fame, higher and higher still, I would rather spend my days in the meanest prison pen that the wit and the malice of men can contrive than change places with you. Infinitely rather. There are some things worse than prison. Ford introduced that statement, and then he told you it showed that I inspired McNamara's act. What do you 12 men think about a person who could make a statement like that? Bittinger testified that he had a conversation with McNamara. He said he came to my office and told me about it, and told me about some trinkets that he had, that another detective came with him, one who I had employed in other matters, and that part was true. He admitted on cross-examination that he did tell me Burns had traitors in our camp with whom he was consulting, and that he had offered to tell me about them. He told me that some of the members of the executive board of the organization I was defending were in the pay of Burns, and this perhaps was time. They had traitors of ours in their employ. These traitors infest every labor union in this country. The money of the employer is used to hire men to betray their comrades into the commission of crime. I know this. I have fought many of these cases, gentlemen, and I have fought them as squarely as I could possibly fight with such men. One of the cheapest, meanest, littlest, one of the most contemptible lies that he uttered to this jury was when he discussed the testimony of ex-Senator William E. Mason of Chicago, who testified to my reputation. Ford says, "You mean Mason, the seat-mate of Lorimer?" Now, he did not even know better. He did not know anything about Mason. He was willing to perpetrate any lie to take away my liberty. Mason left the Senate 10 years before Lorimer ever entered it, and they were always bitter enemies, and yet because Lorimer had been expelled from the Senate, Ford thought if he made that lying, malicious statement, you 12 men would be more apt to send me to the penitentiary. Why, gentlemen, if I must choose, I will go down on Main Street and bribe jurors rather than bear false witness like Ford. Is there any comparison? There is some boldness, some courage, or at least some recklessness to the one. There is nothing but cowardice and infamy in the other. Well, Bittinger comes out here, and he telephones me to meet him at the Alexandria Hotel, and I go, and I write on an envelope the number of my telephone. Wonderful discovery, Sherlock Holmes. Here is an envelope that has various figures on it. Home 6745-10, whatever you are a mind to call it. Crime in August, heard for the first time a year later. The testimony of Bittinger, prompted by Ford, not by the mind of Ford, but by the jaw of Ford. Crime. He met me at the hotel. He told me he was ready to give me information about spies, that he was going to San Francisco in a few days and could put me in touch with somebody who had betrayed us up there. I was not sure about him. Nobody is sure about a double-crosser. Sometimes he is your fellow, and sometimes he is the other man's. You are taking your chances. I had others beside Bittinger, some who had kept their money and rendered me service and gave me back reports of their detectives in my office. Bittinger sent me a telegram, as I testified, and here comes Ford and says, "Did you send this mysterious telegram to Bittinger, saying that you would be in San Francisco?" I said, "Yes, I sent a telegram. I don't remember the wording." "Is it in your handwriting?" "No." Whose is it? I don't know. Is it your wife's? How much would you take to have a mind like Ford's? I will tell you what you would take if you had a mind like Ford. You would take arsenic. What the difference who wrote the dispatch if I said I sent it? He picks out a little piece of paper on which is written 6097, which he says was the number of the room I occupied at the Palace Hotel, and asks me who wrote those numbers. Asks me? Ford asks me. I cannot help it. I am here. I may die. To every man on this earth death cometh, sooner or late. I do not mind death. It is rather galling, though, to be eaten alive by ants. That is all that worries me over this transaction. He asked me whether I wrote that. I did not think so. Probably Bittinger wrote it. But I might have. I don't care, and I said so. Then he asked me to write down those figures. Then what did he do? He tells this jury I disguised my hand when I wrote those figures. Did I? Do you know whether I did or not? Did you see the figures I wrote? Did anybody testify as to whether it was my natural handwriting or not? Did he introduce them? Did he show them to the jury? Why, no, nothing of the sort. But he told this jury that I tried to disguise my hand in writing a set of figures, which I testified might have been the number of my room. And I went to San Francisco and saw Bittinger, and he told me he would take me where I could see a meeting between Burns and one member of our executive board, and I gave him $200 after giving him $500 for the same purpose. And of course, Bittinger did not keep his faith. And here comes in another little miserable bit of perjury to help strengthen their case. A miserable little bit of perjury that is as plain as sunrise. No man, gentlemen, honestly believes that I had anything to do with bribing or attempting to bribe Lockwood down at the corner of 3rd and Los Angeles Streets. Of course, there may be men who think I would do it. Ford thinks so, I guess. He would think anything to send a man to the penitentiary. But could anybody else on earth think that? I am not talking about my goodness, gentlemen. I have not too much goodness, but I always had all that I could carry around, sometimes more than I ought to have carried around. And I have played according to the rules of the game, and have taken a little hand in this trial, and you can compare my work as to whether it is according to the rules of the game with any of the other lawyers in the case. And I have played it that way for 35 years, and I have never done anything of this kind, nor had to do anything of this kind. But that is not what I am discussing. If you 12 men think that I, with 35 years of experience, general attorney of a railroad company of the city of Chicago, attorney for the Elevated Railroad Company, with all kinds of clients and important cases, if you think that I would pick out a place half a block from my office and send a man with money in his hand in broad daylight to go down on the street corner to pass $4,000 and then skip over to another street corner and pass $500, two of the most prominent streets in the city of Los Angeles, if you think I did that, gentlemen, why, find me guilty. I certainly belong in some state institution. Whether you select the right one or not is another question, but I certainly belong in some one of them, and I will probably get treated in one the same as in the other. I say nobody in their senses would believe that story, and Ford knew it, and to bolster it up by a contemptible liar, he has Bittinger say that I passed $500 in the elevator, and that Bittinger then told me that it was a careless way to do business. I know who told him to say that. I know who inspired that perjury. Of course, I did not pass $500 in the elevator, but if I had just as much right to give that $500 for that purpose as I would have to buy $500 worth of hogs. Just exactly. I was doing exactly what they were doing, what Burns admitted he was doing, what was done in all their cases, what Sam Brown says they did when he testified that they filled our office with detectives. And here comes this wonderful man, so honest, so pure, so mighty Ford, who says the state has a right to do that, who says the state has a right to put spies in the camp of the criminal. But the criminal hasn't the right to put spies in their camp. Isn't that wonderful, gentlemen? Here is a contest between two parties in litigation. The prosecution has a right to load us up with spies and detectives and informers, and we cannot put anyone in their office. Now, what do you think of that? Do any of you believe it? Let me clear up more of this driftwood that has been thrown around the case for the purpose of poisoning the minds of this jury against me. I, who have spent a lifetime, well, not all good, I wish it were, I have been human. I have done both good and evil, but I hope when the last reckoning is made, the good will overbalance the evil, and if it does, then I have done well. I hope it will so overbalance the evil, and if it does, then I have done well. I hope it will so overbalance it that you jurors will believe it is not to the interest of the state to have me spend the rest of my life in prison, though I could find some useful work even there. The next thing they accused me of was the flight from the state of Flora Kaplan, wife of David Kaplan, a defendant with the McNamaras. It is too absurd to talk about. A woman who could not be a witness, who could only be hounded and spied upon by detectives and crooks, who could only be driven from her employment into starvation by district attorneys and their accomplices, a woman whom I knew could never appear in the case, and whom I had no more to do with than the man in the moon. Let me tell you this, and you can make the most of it. If she had been the most important witness that the state had, I would have said to her, "Go, get away from these hounds before they murder you. When the time comes that they want you, you can come back." Nobody can subpoena a witness and hold him in the state for more than 6 months. Witnesses have a right to go and come on the face of the earth as they wish, reporting for duty when the time comes. And this was the first day of August, and she would not have been needed until the 1st of January at the nearest. And yet they have brought it up here as a reason why I shall be convicted in another matter. You heard the story. You heard how she went and why she went. Is there any evidence that I knew a single thing about it? What object would I have had? What would any of you have done? If you had any red blood in your veins, you would have clubbed somebody or sent her away. You would have probably have sent her away. You ought to have done both. Now let me show you more of the villainy and the infamy of this prosecution, which reeks from beginning to end with crime and corruption, and with bloodlessness and heartlessness to the last degree. Mr. Ford stood before this court and this jury and said that I bribed the witness Bame to commit perjury. The next day his chief said it was not true, but in his argument he has stated it again among the infamous lies that have fallen from his lips. Bribe Bame. The evidence in this case shows that every dollar he ever got from me was for his expenses, pay for his time and for the man on the farm, $412 altogether. But Ford says I bribed him to commit perjury. Gentlemen, is there safety for anyone when men like Ford are running at large? Bribe Bame? What is the evidence that they produce? Is it that Lecomte Davis and I had been together in Davis's office all evening. Then Ford gets Bame to swear that he came to my office next morning so I could be alone with him. But Davis's testimony and my testimony is that Bame never was in my office at that time. What else about Bame? They began their testimony back in Chicago, where they say I got Bame to come out here for an illegal purpose. Did I? You heard his testimony. Mr. Ford says that I had no right to send a man into jail to interview his wonderful witness, McManigal. And he says I committed a crime in bringing Mrs. McManigal here. What is the evidence on that? Mrs. McManigal has not become a traitor. It is a wonder that Ford does not indict her so that she can be a traitor. Ford likes traitors and informers and crooks and detectives and heartless knaves. Everybody is a liar in this case but Franklin. Everybody is a crook in this case but the white-winged Harrington. All crooks. Davis is a liar. Job Harriman is a liar. Wolfe is a liar. Older is a liar. These newspaper men are liars. All are liars. And the only Simon Pure man, the only man who stands here as a credit to the beauty of your Los Angeles climate and the glory of your Los Angeles mountains is Franklin. Gentlemen, you ought to advertise him for the tourists. Of course, Bame says that I told him to lie. First I began in Chicago, where I asked him to come out here with Mrs. McManigal. Who else asked her to come? Why, Burns. He offered her money to come. His men met her at the train when she did come. They wanted her, and she had as much right to come at my solicitation as that of Burns. The evidence is that she came to me. She said she didn't believe that her husband had made these confessions, and she wanted to come, and I gave her money out of the defense fund to come and see her husband. And suppose she did come to get an interview with Orty McManigal. Why do you suppose his name was put on the back of the indictment? Names of the witnesses are put on the back of indictments for the very purpose of permitting them to be interviewed by the defendant and his counsel. Now, there was no chance for me to go and see Orty McManigal, but his wife might see him, and his uncle, Bame, might see him. In that way I might prepare my case. I had as much right to do that, gentlemen, as one of you has to consult his lawyer or a doctor. Just the same right, and they know it. And yet for doing what every lawyer does, I am put down as a criminal in Southern California, the land of free men and of free women. All right, gentlemen. Ford thinks that would be California hospitality, no doubt. Well, Bame went before the grand jury and gave his testimony, and he says that he swore falsely, and that Davis and I drilled him. I know he did swear falsely in some respects, for he swore that I did not give him any money, and I did. I paid him by check on a Los Angeles bank, where, of course, the detectives would know of it the next day. Davis and I both testified that he came to us, and that we told him right after the first conference to answer all questions, excepting such as we thought were incompetent, irrelevant, and immaterial, and to these he was to reply, "That don't concern the case." Let us look next at Dickelman. Here is more of the wonderful fairness of this wonderful district attorney that holds your life and your destiny in the hollow of his hand. What about Dickelman? What is the evidence? Dickelman was with a Burns detective in Albuquerque. We had as much right to take him to Chicago as they had to take him to Albuquerque, and Dickelman himself swears that he was given $100 to return to Los Angeles when he would be wanted. Talk about fairness. They talk about Hammerstrom because he is Mrs. Darrow's brother. It is not malice against Mrs. Darrow. It is not malice against Hammerstrom. It is malice against me. They would take that boy and indict and prosecute him, and let Franklin, Harrington, Bain, White, Kruger, everybody else go, because he is one near to me. But what about Dickelman? What is the evidence? Maybe my word is not good any more. It used to be. Even my note was good once. My neighbors and my friends and lawyers used to take my word. They used to take it in place of a stipulation in court. They used to take any statement I made in court or out. Maybe their confidence will be withdrawn after Ford's onslaughts. Davis testifies that he came into my office when a man was present who said he was a detective and who told us that Burns' men had Dickelman in Albuquerque hiding out, and that he, Davis, and I together asked this young man and his companion to go and see him, and if they thought we could make use of him, to take him away from the Burns detective. Was there anything wrong about that? Does anybody claim that it was illegal? Does Dickelman deny that testimony? Does anyone deny it? And yet I am denounced as a crook, a man fit for the penitentiary. And they undertake to prove, by their precious man Franklin, that Davis advised him to commit perjury and told him to make up his story and take it to Ford, but there was no prosecution for that. Darrow is the man we are after. If you know anything about anyone else, keep your mouth shut, but help us get Darrow. Gentlemen, some of you have lived a while in this world. Did any of you ever hear of a thing like this since you were born? Aren't you ashamed of your people, your officials, and your state? If I am guilty, which I have told you in every way under oath and not under oath that I am not, and I have proven, I believe, fortunately by a greater array of honest men and women than are often gathered by a man accused of crime, if I am guilty, is there one man in this jury box, one man upon your oath, your conscience, is there one man here who loves justice and fair play, who will say that I should be singled out from among this mess and every crook and thief and spy and informer and traitor in this case get immunity? Who are these wonderful men who hold the destiny of their fellow men in the hollow of their hands? Who are they? Given the infinite power of forgiving sin, given the power of life and death and the power of punishment, they say to every thug and crook that comes across their path, come to Los Angeles, come to the judgment seat of Fredericks, and though your sins be as scarlet, I will wash them white as snow. Gentlemen, under circumstances like this, I could afford to go to prison, but let me tell you that while a verdict of guilty would place a blot upon my name, it would place one infinitely darker upon the name of every person connected with an outrage like this. Now, let's get to the rest of the case. There were a few little things to clear up, just a few little things, sort of specks on the moon. They said that Franklin went to how many fellows? Smith, Young, Kruger, Younklin, Underwood? I am not going to spend much time about this, because I want to get where I can discuss this Lockwood case before I go to the penitentiary. Did I have something to do with soliciting Younkin, Smith, and Underwood? I sometimes think I did. I'll tell you why. Because Franklin says I did not. Franklin says I did not know anything about these solicitations, that he never even told me. Now, that means something. Of course he didn't tell me. I never heard of it any more than any one of you 12 men. Franklin says I didn't. As long as Franklin says I didn't, I suppose even Ford would believe it. But how comes it that this man was going around offering bribes to jurors that I didn't know of? Suppose I had given him omnibus authority, and he had gone to forum men who had turned him down. Don't you suppose that he would have told me? Do you suppose I wouldn't have known it? Think of it. Here is a man who goes to 4 men without any solicitation from anybody, least of all from me. He never tells me a single word about it. If he went to these 4 without my knowledge or direction, what about the others? Somebody knew of these attempts, somebody besides me, and I think I can hear Mr. Fredericks saying tomorrow, after my last words have been spoken, how could all of these things have gone on and the defendant not know of them? Well, how could it? Of all the people connected with this case, I would have been the last person to know. I was a total stranger in this county. Every other lawyer connected with this case was known throughout the length and breadth of this county. If somebody had been approached at the investigation of counsel, any of the other counsel would have known about it 100 times more readily than I. Of all the people connected with this case who could possibly have known or heard it in any way, I was the last person, and the one most likely to have known or heard of it in any way. Ford speaks of me as though I were a cheap jury briber, ready to give a bribe to anybody who happened along. It is a wonder that I didn't try to bribe Ford. You do not know me. Counsel would not let you read my books. If you turn me loose, I hope sometime you will have a chance to read my books, so you will see if you have made a mistake. Now, I am as fitted for jury bribing as a Methodist preacher for tending bar. By all my training, inclination, and habit, I am about the last person in all this world who could possibly have undertaken such a thing. I do not intimate for a moment that anybody else would, but in all this situation, mine was a position which needed to be guarded the most carefully, as these events have shown. It is the most wonderful case in criminology that I have ever encountered in my profession. You will notice that Franklin had a great penchant for bribing people we couldn't possibly have used as jurors. The more honest the man, the quicker he would offer him something, try to slip him a little money. There was George Lockwood, a man of the strictest integrity. Maybe he is. I don't know him. I wouldn't think so from his having been a friend of Franklin so long. Guy Yonkin was an honest man, and John Underwood was honest, and Smith was honest, every one of them honest men, every last one. And Franklin goes and visits with their wives and asks them whether they will take a bribe in the McNamara case. Now, gentlemen, we have got to use a little common sense in this matter. If I am going to the penitentiary, it will be of great solace to me in the long days of my confinement to think you used a little common sense in this case and were not carried away by Ford. Does it look like a case of jury bribing, or does it look like something that was framed up? Out of all these men whose names Franklin mentioned, he swears that he believes that Yonkin, Smith, Underwood, and the man Lockwood, captain of the chain gang, one honest and incorruptible, and he goes forth to bribe them. But Kruger was not honest. Something else was the matter with him. Kruger had been in trouble with the district attorney, and Franklin says he knew the district attorney would not take him, and he testified that he told me so. So he tried to force money onto Kruger, when he knew that Kruger could not possibly have been a juror, and it took 2 men to get this fellow whom the district attorney could not possibly have accepted as a juror. Gentlemen, am I dreaming? Is this a real case, and have I been practicing law for 35 years and built up some position in the community where I live and where I don't live, and now am I brought to the door of the penitentiary charged with a crime like this? Gentlemen, don't ever think that your own life or liberty is safe, that your own family is secure. don't ever think that any human being is safe when under evidence like this and circumstances like these, I, with some influence and some respect and some money, am brought here and placed in the shadow of the penitentiary for 6 long months. Am I dreaming? And will I awaken and find it all a horrible nightmare, and that no such thing has happened? End of Darrow's Plea, Part 2, Section 20. Section 21 of Clarence Darrow Selected Works, 1893 to 1917. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Section 21, Darrow's Plea, Part 3. Now, what about Bain? I think you gentlemen must know that every word said about these other fellows shows that I had no connection with this Bain matter. Franklin himself said that I knew nothing whatever about 3. He said that 2 men were sent after Kruger, and that I was informed he could not possibly qualify. These tales are brought up here against me, and yet if I was not connected with these cases, is it not pretty safe to say that I was not connected with the other 2? The same Bain and the same hand were back of it all, and the same money was back of it all, or the same job was back of it all, whichever way you put it, and I take it there is not a sane person who would think for a moment that I had any knowledge of or any connection with these 4 bribery charges. I am still under indictment for having offered a bride to Robert Bain. Of all the silly things in this case, the Bain matter is about the silliest. It was saved by the prosecution as a delectable morsel for the end of the trial, because Mrs. Bain was a woman somewhat advanced in years, and Robert Bain was a veteran of the Civil War. I do not know what that had to do with it, but Mr. Ford evidently thought it had something to do with it, and so it was brought in here at the last, this Bain case. Now let me just give you a brief recital of some of the evidence in the Bain case, and if I misquote the evidence, any of the jurors or the lawyers are at liberty to correct me. I may sometimes misquote because I cannot carry it in my mind, and I cannot have much of a mind anyway, or I would not have sent down to the corner of 3rd and Main Streets to bribe Lockwood, and then have gone down to see the job done. Think of it. The court may sentence me. If he does, I hope he will send me to the right place. Not content with sending these fellows down to the corner of Main and 3rd, and then went over to 3rd and Los Angeles Streets, I would have run down there on the street myself. Lord! And here are 12 jurors to pass on that. To pass on that! This court ought to adjourn until Monday morning and try this case with the insanity cases. But to come back to Bain. These people, connected with the district attorney's office, discovered that Franklin made a deposit of $1,000 on October 6th. And, of course, thinking that Franklin could not carry around $1,000 in his pocket very long, they concluded that I had given him a check on October 6th. Fine logic, and on this theory Franklin swore to it that he came to my office and got a check and hustled off to the bank on October 6th, which was the first day, he said, that I ever spoke to him about Robert Bain, and the day that he saw Bain's wife for the first time. He says the first time I ever talked to him about jury bribing was October 5th, the day before he hustled down to see Bain's wife. Remember, the first time I spoke to him about jury bribing was on October 6th, and that on the 6th I gave him a check for $1,000. I, a stranger in Los Angeles, a check on a Los Angeles bank to bribe a juror? Another case for the insanity court. Another lie. And at the same time, According to the only other truthful man in this case, besides Franklin, Harrington states that I had $10,000 in my pocket. At least I had it there the week before and had been carrying it around for a month. Why, I would not want to trust myself even with this jury with that $10,000 in my pocket, not in Los Angeles, unless I had the district attorney with me, which I didn't have. $10,000 in my pocket? The evidence in this case shows that I never had a safety deposit vault in Los Angeles and did not have the key to the vault, so I had to carry it in my pocket, and I carried it there for 20 days at least, possibly 30, until I showed it to John Harrington. Now, if I am as smart as Ford says I am, which I am not, he has got to lie one way or the other, so he made it too smart. But if I am anything near as smart as Ford says, and I had this $10,000 in my pocket, suppose it had been one of you, gentlemen. Of course you wouldn't do it, but suppose you would. Then would you give him a check? Suppose you had gone to Chicago where you didn't know anybody and had embarked in jury bribery, and you had $10,000 in your pocket to give to 2 jurors. Would you have drawn a check for one? And yet this miserable mass of perjury is brought up here to this jury to take away the liberty of a man. And what more, lo and behold, when the check turns up, it was not given on October 6th, but on October 4th. Now, what does Ford say? Ford could not possibly think anything was innocent to save his life. He has been connected with the district attorney's office so long that I don't believe he could think his own mother was honest. He says I probably misstated that check purposely. Probably misstated it purposely. Where is the evidence? Does it come out of thin air, conjured by the malice of his brain? Where is the evidence? Does Ford think you are children? Does he think in some mysterious way he has drawn together here from the county 12 children and placed them in charge of my liberty? He must. Misdated it purposely. Why should I have given any check at all? If I had taken thought to misdate it, I would have given him cash, wouldn't I? Why, any child knows better. Ah, he says, you may have misdated it by accident. Well, yes, I may. A great many things may be in this world. Ford might tell the truth by accident. He might. But I wouldn't convict him of telling the truth on any evidence so uncertain as that. And what else does Franklin do? He goes to the bank and he draws $500. The bank cashier swears positively that he gave the money to him in 50s and 100s. The bank cashier swore that he gave him $50 and $100 bills, and yet Franklin gave only $20 bills to the Baines. Every dollar he left there was in 20s. Now, gentlemen, this does not rest on the bank cashier's testimony alone. There comes out of their own mouths a bit of corroboration which shows perfectly that the bank cashier was right. Mr. Franklin puts $500 in his pocket and rushes to see, not Mrs. Bain, she was out, so he runs over to see one of the neighbors' wives and leaves his card. Here is a detective for your life. Why, he has got Sherlock Holmes faded. He has got Burns beaten 40 ways. He is going to bribe a juror, and he goes over and sees this juror's neighbor's wife and asks her to tell Bain to call him at his office. No wonder he used Main Street for his field of operation. And you, gentlemen, are expected to stand for it? No, I am to stand for it. All you do is return the verdict. I stand for it. Ford tells you that you do not have to do anything but return a verdict. Now, what do you suppose he said that for? Did he want to take from the minds of this jury the responsibility involved in their verdict? Gentlemen, I don't ask for any mercy at your hands. I want a fair deal. I am going to get it. But no man has the right to take from any jurors the responsibility that they bear to the case they are judging and tell them that they are to hold a man's life in their keeping without thought. If you think I deserve conviction, then convict me. But do it with your own eyes open and your minds clear. Now here is a fellow that goes down to bribe Bain, and he doesn't talk with Mr. Bain, but goes to the neighbor, and later he goes back to the house and does not find Bob at home, so he talks with Bob's wife. If Bob's wife had not been at home, he would have talked with the dog. If the dog had not been there, he would have talked to the cat. He was out after jurors, and it is a wonder he didn't send a letter. So he goes back to Mrs. Bain. Mrs. Bain asked him to subscribe to the Examiner so she should get a premium, and Franklin subscribed. He wrote his name, and Mrs. Bain said, "Is that all?" Franklin said, "No. You want the money, don't you?" And then he said, "Can you change a 50 or 100?" That is what Mrs. Bain said, and it is no doubt true. Franklin said to her, "Can you change a 50 or can you change 100?" One or the other. He had come right straight from the bank where the teller swears he gave them $500 in 100s and 50s, and Mrs. Bain said that he asked her to change a 50 or 100. So if the bank teller needs any corroboration, here it comes from the mouth of Mrs. Bain that he did get 50s and 100s. If he had gotten one $20 bill in the bunch, wouldn't he have asked her to change a 20? He finally pulled out his wallet and managed to find some small change, Mrs. Bain says, and he went back that night and saw Robert Bain and gave him $400, every penny in $20 bills. Now, gentlemen, there it is. A man is presumed to be honest and not a criminal, and a jury presumed to be sensible and fair, and to understand the responsibility involved in passing on the liberty of a fellow man. Now tell me, did he get those 20s from me or through any check of mine? The bank teller says no, and Mrs. Bain says no. Where did he get those 20s? I cannot tell. The money did not come from the bank on my check, and there is no way on earth to figure that it did. And if I didn't furnish the money, where did it come from? Whose hand was working out there in the darkness, unknown to me and unknown to other attorneys? Whose hand was it that stretched out in the night and was working my ruin? Of all the cases upon which a grand jury ever acted, the Bain case is the silliest. Gentlemen, there isn't a chance in 10,000 that I would have been guilty in the Bain case. Not a chance in 10,000. Here comes Robert Bain on the witness stand. He has immunity, and we will assume that he tells the truth. I will tell you why I took him on the jury. Bain told us he had belonged to the first labor union ever organized in Los Angeles. His hair was white, and somehow, as we get along in years, we think more of the few years that are left than do the young. So especially in a murder case, when I find a man with white hair, I know he will be as tender and kind and careful of his brother's life as he is of his own. We know as we grow in age and experience, we understand more and more what great influence circumstances have upon our lives, and how near alike are all men after all is said and done. And we grow kindlier in our judgments, more charitable to our fellow man than we were when filled with hot blood and the intemperate passions of youth. So Bain was taken on the jury. Franklin said he was a good man for the jury. Franklin was consulted in the case of every juror, as Davis and I testified, and as naturally would be the case. And what did Bain tell Franklin? You remember the story? He says that when Franklin gave him the money, he told Franklin that if he found the evidence against McNamara convincing, he would render a verdict of guilty, didn't he? He told Franklin that if the evidence convinced him, he would vote guilty. He said he would not have voted guilty anyhow unless the evidence was convincing. Now here is the man himself to whom they have given immunity and who is here in some mysterious way to testify against me. He says that he told Franklin then that if the evidence was convincing, he would find my client guilty. And yet Franklin thrust $400 onto him when he swears he got it from me and told me about it. Gentlemen, do you believe it? Isn't it the stuff that dreams are made of? Do you believe it? Bribe the man with $400 when he was not bribed at all, when he told Franklin that if the evidence was convincing, he would find my client guilty. And that is not all. After he got into the jury room and stayed there with his fellows day after day, of course, you know the jury is instructed that they must not talk with their fellows about the case, must not form any opinion. Of course, you know they do not. I know they do. I have lived in courts for 35 years. Well, Bain told a juror in that jury room that if he stayed on the jury, they would get what was coming to them. That is the evidence of witness Webb. Fredericks spent longer in cross-examining Webb than he did any other witness, but could not stir him. Webb's evidence remained unshaken. Gentlemen, it is simply insanity to talk about the Bain case. First, the check was given before the bribery was ever spoken of. Second, Franklin got no money from that check to give to Bain. Third, Franklin went to the neighbor's wife and to Bain's wife, and they called at his office. Fourth, Bain was not bribed at all. And fifth, Bain says himself that he would have found my client guilty after he got in the jury room. And yet, after all this, I am guilty of bribing Bain? I have told you my story. I have told you of all these matters as simply and as plainly as I could. Ford said that I lied, that I quibbled, and that I hesitated. Now, I do not blame anybody for making any argument that is fair and useful to his end. I will just touch on the matter for a moment, and you do the rest. Ford went on the stand. Who quibbled the most, he or I? Do you remember? Why, he is so shifty that he could not admit to this jury that he knew Oscar Lawler was the prosecutor specially retained by the United States government. He quibbled and lied and hedged upon the simplest question until this court said, "The court will take judicial notice of that fact." Ford tells you that I quibbled and hesitated and lied and had my attorneys make objections. He has a right to argue that I lied because I contradicted Franklin, and I would not question his right to argue for a minute. But did I quibble or hesitate? He asked me questions for 4 long days, gentlemen. Did they bother me? Did I hesitate? Did I quibble? I took pains to understand his questions. I was not going to let him trick me into the penitentiary by not understanding the devious workings of his devious head. I was going to say mind, but I changed that for head. I threw myself open to him, and there was not a question that I did not answer the best I could. Perhaps every answer I made was not correct, but I thought it was. Now, I will take one of you men, and I am not as smart as Ford, as I can prove by Ford. I can take any one of you men and cross-examine you for 4 days, and I will catch you somewhere, I think. But anyhow, I threw myself open, and they questioned me to their heart's content. I leave it to you whether my answers were frank and honest and fair and prompt, or whether they were not. Now, gentlemen, having cleared away these other matters, let us see what there is in the Lockwood case. Lockwood. I am to go to the penitentiary because Franklin gave White $4,000 at the corner of Main and 3rd Streets to be held for Lockwood? White transferred it on the corner of Los Angeles and 3rd about 9 o'clock in the morning of the 28th day of November. These other things we have considered were thrown in here to prove it, so as to help out in some way the 2 witnesses whom Mr. Rogers has so well pointed out as the only witnesses against me. They thought that by giving you quantity, they might forget the quality of their testimony. Now they have marshaled here to condemn me 9 detectives and 9 informers, and nobody's liberty in any English-speaking country has ever taken away on evidence like that. These men, clothed with the power of the law, with the opportunity to reach out their processes through the length and breadth of the land, have said to John Harrington, "Unless you bear witness against Darrow, you must go to the penitentiary yourself." These men hold Franklin by the throat and tell him that he will go to the penitentiary unless he testifies. He needn't testify against any Los Angeles man. It was only Darrow they want. These men reached out to Cooney, to Fitzpatrick, to Bame, and to Bain, to Mrs. Bain, to anybody whom they could intimidate and frighten, to whom the doors of the penitentiary looked grimmer and harder than they do to me. Why, gentlemen, I don't want to go, but when Harrington told me, as he admits he did, that all would be forgiven if I told him where Schmidt or Kaplan was, do you suppose that I would purchase my life at the expense of the life of my fellow man, no matter if that fellow man was a criminal? I am not his judge. Only the infinite God can judge the human heart, and I never try to judge. I never would do it, and hope I never shall. And when Harrington told me that if I would furnish evidence against Sam Gompers in their wild crusade to destroy the trades unions, so that men and women might toil longer for less reward, do you suppose I thought or hesitated or waited to draw my breath for a single moment? I had no information to give, but I had as much as Franklin or Harrington had. I could have told them any story that I saw fit. I could have purchased my liberty at the price of my honor. And then Ford would have said that I was a noble man, and that the fellow I was betraying was a Judas Iscariot. Lord, what a mind he has, and what a heart he has, and what a conscience he has! Would a man hesitate? No. And because I did not, I am pilloried here before this jury and before the world as a criminal. Gentlemen, there is only one thing I can say in favor of Franklin. By comparison, Harrington has made a gentleman out of him. Anybody is a gentleman compared with Harrington. Perhaps you think I am especially bitter toward Harrington, but I don't believe in bitterness, as some of you may have suspicioned this afternoon. I have always tried to curb it all my life. I don't blame Harrington, and I don't blame Ford. Nobody is responsible for the shape of his brain. It conforms to the skull, which is made of bone, and no one can help the shape of his head. You may not believe it, but there is not a man on this jury that cannot go back through the years and see how the smallest circumstances have affected the whole course of his life. circumstances entirely beyond him and outside his control. And a circumstance that might affect you might not affect me. Some have a large brain, some have a small one, some have a symmetrical brain, and some have an unsymmetrical brain. We are no more responsible for the shape of our brains than we are of the shape of our faces. I know this is a matter of philosophy. I know Harrington is not to blame for being a coward. I know God made him a coward, and he cannot help it. And I have spoken of him with this view in my mind all the way along. I would not harm him. Talk to this jury about my moral responsibility for crime. I defy any living man to say where, either by speech or word of pen, I have advised anything cruel in my life. I would have walked from Chicago across the Rocky Mountains and over the long, dreary desert to lay my hand upon the shoulder of J.B. McNamara and tell him not to place dynamite in the Times building. All my life I have counseled gentleness, kindness, and forgiveness to every human being. And, gentlemen, at the same time, even speaking for my own liberty, I do not retreat 1 inch or 1 iota from what I really believe as to this. You were told about the horror of the Times explosion by Mr. Ford? Why? So that some of the horrors of that terrible accident might be reflected upon me, to get me into the penitentiary. Now, gentlemen, let me tell you honestly what I think about that. It hasn't anything to do with this case, excepting as they dragged it in here to prejudice the minds of this jury and to argue that this man should not have been defended by me. Do you suppose I am going to judge J.B. McNamara? I know him. Do you know anything about criminals? Did you ever see a man who committed a crime? I take back nothing of what I ever said or written or known upon that subject. Men who are called criminals are like you and me, like all other men. They may do this wrong, and they may do 10,000 things right. I never saw a case where a wife or mother or a father or a brother or a sister or a husband or a friend didn't plead for the criminal, that he or she knew, and point out to the governor and those charged with mercy 10,000 good things in his life and in his character that would commend him to mercy, while his enemies were telling only the wrongs he had done. I know that the same feelings lurk in the brain and heart of every man. I am not responsible for J.B. McNamara's brain. I am not responsible for his devotion to a cause, even though it carries him too far. Let me tell you something, gentlemen, which I know District Attorney Fredericks will use in his argument against me, and which I have no reason to feel or will meet with favor in the minds of you 12 men. But it is what I believe. I will just take a chance. Did you ever think of the other side of this question? Lincoln Steffens was right in saying that this was a social crime. That does not mean it should have been committed, but it means this, that it grew out of a condition of society for which McNamara was in no wise responsible. There was a fierce conflict in the city, exciting the minds of thousands of people, some poor, some weak, some irresponsible, some doing wrong on the side of the powerful as well as upon the side of the poor. It inflamed their minds, and this thing happened. Let me tell you, gentlemen, and I will tell you the truth, you may hang these men to the highest tree. You may hang everybody suspected. You may send me to the penitentiary, if you will. You may convict the 54 men indicted in Indianapolis. But until you go down to fundamental causes, these things will happen over and over again. They will come as the earthquake comes. They will come as the hurricane that uproots the trees. They will come as the lightning comes to destroy the poisonous miasmas that fill the air. We as a people are responsible for these conditions, and we must look results squarely in the face. And I want to say to you another thing in justice to that young man who was my client, and whom I risked my life, my liberty, and my reputation to save. He had nothing on earth to gain. His act was not inspired by love of money. He couldn't even get fame, for if he had succeeded, he could never have told any human being as long as he lived. He had nothing to gain. He believed in a cause, and he risked his life in that cause. Whether rightly or wrongly, it makes no difference with the motives of the man. I would not have done it. You would not have done it. But judged in the light of his motives, which is the only way that man can be judged, and for that reason only the infinite God can judge a human being, judged in the light of his motives, I cannot condemn the man, and I will not. I want to say more when you know the man, no matter whom. I have known men charged with crime in all walks of life, burglars, bankers, murderers. When you come into touch with them, and meet them and know them, you feel the kinship between them and you. You feel that they are human. They love their mothers, their wives, their children. They love their fellow man. Why they did this thing or that thing remains the dark mystery of a clouded mind, which all the science of all the world has never yet been wise enough to solve. But this act of McNamara has again been brought before this jury, that it may work upon your passions against me, for nothing else. None of the perpetrators of this deed was ever morally guilty of murder. Never. No one knows it better than the people who were prosecuting them. 16 sticks of dynamite were placed under a corner of the Times building to damage the building, but not to destroy life, to intimidate, to injure property, and for no other reason. He was placed there wrongfully, criminally, if you will, but with no thought of harming human life. The explosion itself scarcely stopped the printing presses. Unfortunately, there was an accumulation of gas and other inflammable substances in the building, which ignited, and the fire resulting destroyed these human lives. End of Darrow's Plea, Part 3, Section 21. Section 22 of Clarence Darrow Selected Works, 1893 to 1917. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Section 22, Darrow's Plea, Part 4. Gentlemen, do you think my heart is less kind than Ford's? Do you think he would care more than I for the suffering of his fellow men? Do you think for a moment that I did not feel sorry at the destruction of those lives, and for the wives and the children and the friends that were left behind? Wouldn't I feel it as much as he? And yet, gentlemen, this Times matter is paraded before this jury in the hope that in some way it may awaken a prejudice in your hearts against me. Gentlemen, I wish in no way to modify anything I have ever said or thought upon this subject. There never was a man charged with crime that I was not sorry for him and sorry for his crime, that I could not imagine the motives that moved his poor weak brain, and I tell you today, as Mr. Stephens told you from the witness stand, there will come a time when crime will disappear, but that time will never come or be hastened by the building of jails and penitentiaries and scaffolds. It will only come by changing the conditions of life under which men live and suffer and die. At 5 o'clock, court adjourned for the day. On the following morning, August 15th, Mr. Darrow resumed his argument to the jury. Gentlemen of the jury, you cannot have listened here for 3 months and not have understood this case. No intelligent person could, and I know you do understand it. For the balance of my argument, I shall confine my talk almost entirely to the main charge brought against me, and say no more about these outside issues, which mean nothing except an effort on the part of the state, cruel, unjust, and unlawful, to prejudice you against me. The question which you are to decide here is this: did I give Franklin $4,000 on the morning of the 28th of November to seek to bribe Lockwood? That is all there is to it. Now, is Franklin's story true, or is it a lie? If I am to be convicted, it must be upon the story which Franklin tells and the evidence which he presents. It must be upon the story that on Monday morning, the 28th, he met me in my office, that I called up Job Harriman, who came there and handed me the $4,000, which I then gave to Franklin and told him to go down on the streets and bribe a juror. That's all there is of it. Now, what is the evidence on that? Job Harrison comes on the witness stand and swears there is not a single word of truth in it. Are you going to say that he is a perjurer? Mr. Ford says that he believes it. But where in the record is there any evidence or any indication that Job Harriman committed perjury or was guilty of bribery? Next, Frank Wolf testifies that I came down with him on the streetcar that morning, and that he went with me to my office, that we discussed the political campaign and other matters, until I was called up on the phone and said that I was going to Job Harrison's political headquarters, and that I went out with him. Who is Frank Wolf? A man who is managing editor of the Herald for years, a man who has held important newspaper positions for 20 years, and who is now one of the editors of the municipal paper in the city, a man upon whose countenance truth is stamped as plainly as upon any man who lives. Is he a liar, a perjurer? For what? He is not charged with bribery, and he is not interested in this case. Are you likely to throw away the evidence of Frank Wolf and replace it with the likes of Franklin? I will guarantee, gentlemen, that your observation would lead you to trust me before you would trust Franklin if my word stood alone. I believe you would take my word if it stood alone against every one of these informers and crooks and immunity hunters. Maybe we are all liars, gentlemen. Perhaps everybody in this case lied but Franklin, as Ford said. Perhaps Wolf lied. Perhaps with their 2 grand juries and their Burns outfit and their Erectors Association, they have raked and scraped this fair county and this fair city. Perhaps they have gone out into the broad world from here to New York and found only 2 honest men, Franklin and Harrington, and all the rest of us are liars? But I don't think you will believe it. Franklin, you remember, first tried to fasten his crime upon Lockwood. Then within a week we find him telling Joe Musgrave that he would slip it to someone else. He might not have thought then whom, but he found out later, when Ford told him, "We want Darrow." Next, within another week, Franklin had a hearing before a justice of the peace, and he tells 4 newspaper men, White, Bernard, Willard, and Jones, all of whom appeared here, he tells them not simply that Lockwood lied when he said my name was mentioned, but that I was an innocent man, and that he would not stand still and keep his lips sealed and see an innocent man accused. Ford says that Franklin admits these statements. He did not. Ford knows he did not. Franklin said on the stand here he never made those statements. Why did Ford misquote the evidence? Lord, how short the memory of a bloodhound is when he scents human blood. Franklin's testimony refuted. Let me call your attention to the testimony. There is my friend Willard, who came to the witness stand. He represents the Associated Press. Mr. Ford asked him, "Did you write what Franklin told you in your story?" Willard answered, "I think I did." "Are you sure?" "I think so, but it was a long time ago." Then Ford said, "You go back and find your story, and I will recall you for cross-examination." And he never recalled him. Never. And here was Jones, who represents the Tribune. Did Franklin admit that he told Jones what Jones testified to? He denied it, and he lied about it. And what did Ford say? "Why, you remember Harry Jones on the stand?" Ford asked him. "Did you publish that statement in your paper?" "I think so. I think I wrote it, but it might have been cut out. I don't know whether it was published." Ford asked, "Are you sure?" "Yes." "Bring your paper into court and let's see." And Jones came in with his report and read it to this jury, after Franklin had sworn that he had never said such a thing in the world. He told it to White. He told it to Bernard, both the newspaper men. He told it to Nicholson, who sat here day after day writing for the Examiner. 5 of them. Everyone are liars. What next? This is a talkative man, this man Franklin, especially when you get him around the Waldorf saloon. He met Frank Dominguez and George Drain along the latter part of December or the 1st of January, and told them unqualifiedly and without equivocation that I never gave him a dishonest dollar in my life. And then he came on the witness stand and denied it, saying that he had no such conversation. Again, on the 3rd day of February, 2 weeks after he had gone before the grand jury, and more than a week after he had made this statement to Oscar Lawler, he again met Frank Dominguez, and he reiterated the statement which he had made after this confession, that I had given him no money for bribery. And he met his friend George Hood, the lodge member, who asked him, "Why didn't you take that money and put it in your pocket?" And, "Did Darrow give it to you?" He told Hood that Darrow did not give it to him, and that the reason he did not put it in his pocket was because the man who gave it to him was watching him when he passed it, and that man was a stranger to him and did not live in this city. That is the reason he did not steal the $4,000. That is the way he excused himself to his friend Hood for not being a thief. That is an excuse that men often make, that someone is nailed down and they cannot steal it. That prevents a lot of stealing in this world. Then, along about the 12th of January, Franklin went to Attorney Tom Johnson, whom he supposed was close to the district attorney. And what did he say to Johnston? "Gentlemen, I do not know whether you have had much to do with lawyers or not. You probably have more money if you did not. I am not saying anything about that, but if any of you get into trouble, you generally tell your lawyer the truth. And good men do get into trouble now and then, and bad men stay out of trouble now and then. You can't tell whether a man is good or bad because he gets into trouble or stays out. But if you get into trouble, you tell your lawyer the truth, just as you tell your doctor the truth." Well, what did Franklin tell Johnston on the 12th day of January? He told him that I had never given him a cent of money for bribery, never. He told him that the bribe money was given to him by someone else, and he told him that I never knew anything about it. Now, are you going to convict me on Franklin's word, when that is the statement which he made to his lawyer in confidence? It's unthinkable. Johnson may be a liar. Maybe. You don't have to believe it. And Johnson goes to Mr. Ford, and he comes back to Franklin and reports. That won't do. Nothing will do but to make a statement against Darrow. And what does Franklin reply? He says to Johnston, "If I made a statement against Darrow, I would be a goddamn liar." Now, Franklin said in January that if he made a statement against me, he would be a blankety-blank liar. In May, he makes that statement. What is he? What is he? I will not characterize him. He has characterized himself, and I hope the wonderful district attorney's office got its money worth when it bribed him with liberty to make his statement against me. Then Franklin meets Davis and me, Davis having called me to his office on the 14th, 2 days later, and according to Davis and me, Franklin told us then together that Johnston had come to him reporting that he had been to the district attorney's office and telling him if he would turn up evidence against me, he need not say a word about anybody in Los Angeles, that I was the one they were after. And Franklin replied, I could not do it. I have no evidence against you. I could not do it. Maybe Davis and I are liars. Ford says I have corrupted Davis. Maybe I have. Maybe I have corrupted everybody I have met, excepting Ford. It takes some evidence to show that, doesn't it? Davis, a man of standing and high character in the city where he has lived and practiced law, he is a liar? Franklin is telling the truth? Suppose we took a change of venue and tried this case before 12 bushmen in Africa. Do you suppose they would stick me? Do you suppose that you could find a man who would take a club and knock me on the head if a jury did find me guilty on the evidence of Franklin? Well, Franklin is still talking. A man named Warner came to him to get employment in August or September, and he patted his jury list, which was lying on his desk, and said, I am going to win this case right here. There is an angle to this case that the lawyers know nothing about. Is the witness Warner a liar? How do you know it? Franklin swears he is. He swears that everybody lies, excepting himself, and that he is a liar too. Not only a liar, but a blankety-blank liar. That is what Franklin says, not what I say. But he is an emphatic man, and he describes himself stronger than I would care to describe him. But he kept on talking, and he went down to the beach to Venice and saw a policeman, Peter Pirot, and he asked if Pirot would like to go into business with him at Venice and open a detective office. Pirot says, You have been in trouble, and I don't think it would be a good idea. Franklin replies, Oh, I will get out of that all right in a few days. They don't want me, they want Darrow. And Pirot reports this conversation to my friend William Cavanaugh. And then Ford says, Why didn't you put Cavanaugh on the stand? Is he my friend? Have you any doubt what he would have said if he had been on the witness stand? The reason I didn't ask Cavanaugh to be a witness was because I knew they would claim he was testifying for me on account of our close friendship, and the district attorney knows that is the reason. To reach Gompers through Darrow. And Pirot sees Franklin again after the plea of guilty. He sees him with Watt. The meeting is purely accidental, as both Watt and Pirot testified, I having no more knowledge of it than the man in the moon. Watt, however, is my friend, and as honorable a man as any who has come before you in all the weary weeks you have sat listening to this case. You cannot look at Watt's face and doubt it, not for a moment. A man who for 6 years has been city clerk for the town of Venice, a man of character and standing. Franklin met them and took lunch with them. There was a political campaign at Venice, and Franklin was talking freely because he wanted to get this agency down at the beach, and when Watt told him that he had heard of his trouble, Franklin said, That is all right. It is over now. I pleaded guilty in the Bain case, and they are holding the Lockwood case over my head to make me come through against Darrow. To make him come through against me. and they talked more about it, and Franklin said I had never given him dishonest money. Now Ford asked, how could Franklin say that after he pleaded guilty? Why was he saying only what he had said all the while? He might have said it from force of habit. He might have said it because he was drinking and didn't think to lie. He might have said it because even in Franklin, the truth naturally comes to one's lips first. And afterward, he caught himself up and said, "Oh, I must not talk about this case." Then Watt came and told me of this interview as he testified here, and he sought another meeting with Franklin, this time in company with Steinman. Steinman is a man I have never seen in my life, as he testified, except that I had been once introduced to him. Steinman owns the Decatur Hotel and was a director of a bank. He is a man of standing and character. How does he compare with Franklin? And Franklin told Watt and Steinman together that the money to bribe Lockwood came from someone else, from outside parties, and that I never knew a single thing about it. He added that I would not be tried anyway because I was pining away and would die pretty quick. Well, I will, and I thought some of the time as his trial dragged out its weary way with fool questions and immaterial issues, I thought I would perhaps die before we got through. But I am here still and hope to be here some little time after this jury pronounces its judgment on me. Now, at this meeting, Franklin told Watt and Steinman that the reason they wanted to get me was because I knew something about Gompers, and that if I would say something against Gompers, they would let me go as they had let him go. Wonderful, isn't it? Did he say it? Are Steinman and Watt liars? Are you satisfied that they are liars and Franklin tells the truth when he has admitted that he is a blankety-blank liar himself? Now, gentlemen, if you would not be satisfied by this, you would be not satisfied though one should rise from the dead. You would not be satisfied if an angel with a flaming sword should appear and testify that it so happened. I would be absolutely helpless in the hands of my enemies if an array of testimony like this could not satisfy 12 impartial men. You whom I know are not yearning for my blood, you whom I know I have never harmed in this world, and I hope that I have harmed very few. Now think of the impudence, gentlemen, to ask you to believe a man as weak as he is, and impeached as he is, and upon such testimony to send a man to the penitentiary. But that is not all. Franklin swears that he came up to my office on the morning of the 20th of November and told me that he was going down to 3rd and Main to bribe Lockwood. He says Job Harriman came up with an overcoat on his arm after I had telephoned to him, though Job swears he came direct from his house that morning, and I could not have telephoned him. But what is the use? Job is a liar. I would need Franklin to prove anything in this case, and I cannot get him because I do not happen right now to have the key to the penitentiary. If I did, I would have him. The district attorney's office has the key. Franklin says Harriman came up there, and I stepped into another room and got a roll of bills containing $4,000 from him. And then I handed the money to Franklin, and I said, in effect, "Now, little boy, take this roll in your hand and trot down to the corner of 3rd and Main, as near my office as you can. Trot down to 3rd and Main and buy a jour at 9 o'clock in the morning." It is as if one of you would give your boy a penny and would say, "Go down to the grocery and buy some candy." And he takes it in his hand. Of course, when he took that Bain 500 in his hand, there was 100 got away between the bank and Bain. He says he doesn't know where it went. Maybe the Waldorf Saloon could give some information. I don't know. But anyway, He held this $4,000 in his hand so that none of it could get away, and he trotted down the hall, down the elevator, and down to the street, holding it in his hand to bribe a juror on a Monday morning on a busy street corner. And the cautious White says, "I don't know whether it is wise to pass this on the corner. Shouldn't we go into the saloon?" And they went into the saloon, and then probably White had lost his caution and went over to Third and Los Angeles and passed over the $500 of the 4,000. He must have taken some bitters that robbed him of his caution. And Franklin goes down with him, not on one street, but 2 streets. "Franklin leaves me," he says, "about 20 minutes before 9. He was trotting down, going rapidly, so quickly that he did not stop to put the money in his pocket. I stayed in my office for about 20 minutes, and lo and behold, I appeared down at the corner of Main and 3rd Streets within half a block of my office. Now, Ford tells this jury what he knows is not true, and what he does not believe, that I went down to watch Franklin pass the money." "What about it, gentlemen? Are you all crazy, or am I dreaming? I did not suppose this panel was served in a lunatic asylum. Did I go down to watch him pass the money? He said I had waited 20 minutes and was not there until it was all over. But why go at all? Gentlemen, there is none of you can imagine that you would commit any crime or wrongful act, but suppose you could imagine it. Supposing I have known that Franklin was going to pass $4,000 to a prospective juror on the corner of Main and 3rd Streets, do you think I would have been within 10 blocks of that place at that time?" Franklin's explanation. "Why, the fact that I was there proves as conclusively as human reason could prove anything that I had absolutely no knowledge of the plot. Ford says I am smart, whatever that means. At least I have never been judged insane, and I have never yet been in a home for the feeble-minded. I do not need to be very smart. Do you suppose any man who knows enough to come in out of the rain, let alone a man who has practiced law for 35 years with fair success, would have gone down there at that time if there were any other highway anywhere else in Los Angeles County? They know it, and for some mysterious reason they have sidetracked Franklin's explanation of my appearance there, which is better than theirs. Why does Franklin say I was there? He tells Watt and Steinman that I must have got word from Brown, their detective, and went there to help Franklin. He said that if I hadn't happened to be there at that inopportune moment, he would have had Lockwood arrested. He admitted that on the stand. He wasn't looking for me. He knew I wouldn't be there. His theory was that Sam Brown or someone in the district attorney's office had given this thing away to me and that I had gone down there to save him. What does he testify? Why, that I walked up toward him and said something to him. Ford asked, "What?" And he replied, "I am not sure what Darrow said. I think he said, 'They are on to you.'" Is there any single syllable of evidence in this case that anybody ever gave me a warning, or that I knew anything about the matter? According to the theory of the state, nobody knew anything about it but Fredericks and a few detectives, and God knows you can't trust detectives. You have got to, because you must take away people's liberty on the evidence of detectives. And then they called 3 wonderful witnesses here to impeach Hawley, the witness who testified that he had telephoned me on that morning to meet him at Job Harriman's headquarters. Look at this impeachment of Hawley. Even if he were a dishonest man, he might call me on the telephone. I take it because the telephone companies are not particular and are willing to rent their service to liars as well as to honest people. Even Franklin used the telephone. But they sought to impeach Hawley, and they brought 3 witnesses. One of them was a man who held a political office with him and who had had trouble with him. Another who wasn't satisfied because he couldn't get his commission in a real estate trade and sued and pursued him. A third who had another business transaction with him and didn't get his money. And there you are. Gentlemen, I have practiced law a good many years, and this is the first time in my life that I have ever known of a lawyer seeking to impeach the integrity of a man by men who have had personal difficulties with him. Did any of you ever have any trouble with anybody? Can there be a man on this jury who has not had difficulty with 3 or 4 men who would be willing to speak ill of him and injure him if it came their way? If you haven't made 3 or 4 enemies, gentlemen, you have lived a very weak and useless life. A man who can go through life as far as you 12 men have gone and not make 3 or 4 enemies is not worthwhile. You had better begin with me, so you will have something to your credit before you get through. End of Darrow's Plea, Part 4, Section 22. Section 23 of Clarence Darrow Selected Works, 1893 to 1917. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Section 23, Darrow's Plea, Part 5. Time not measured by the clock. To halt a minute for fear that I might forget something, Mr. Ford figured on 5 minutes here and 5 minutes there, 2 minutes there and 2 minutes here, so that Hawley could not have telephoned to me. Does a man need to waste his breath on talk like that, where human liberty is involved? Whether he walked a block and a half in 5 minutes, or in 3 minutes, or 4 minutes, does any man know? Does Ford know? And yet he would figure it up and roll it under his tongue as if the destiny of the universe were hanging on a minute or a minute and a half. Does he think we have 12 fools here? I wonder what he thinks. Whether Hawley waited 15 minutes or 5 minutes is of no account. I have waited for a man 3 minutes when I was in a hurry, and it seemed an hour. But I have lingered on some places an hour, and it seemed a few minutes. There is nothing so deceptive as time. It depends on how you feel. I think I have lived 1,000 years in the past year. It seems as if it is longer than all the rest of my life put together with the weight that has been on me. No, you can't measure time that way. The measure of time depends upon something else. It depends on the emotions, whether they are pleasant or unpleasant, whether they are serious or whether you are in haste, upon 1,000 things. It does not depend on the hands of the clock. It is childish to tell this jury that Hawley lies, and that I am a briber on the turn of the second hand of the clock. Away with it. You gentlemen are not bribed to send me to the penitentiary or to keep me out. If you are bribed to send me, take a big one, and don't send me on such fly specks as that. And then I come up to the street and meet Sam Brown of the district attorney's office. My mind full of the settlement in the McNamara case and the weight of 3 men's lives upon my shoulders, wondering what all the trouble down on Main Street was about. And I asked Brown what it was all about. It was an honest question and an honest exclamation when I said, it was horrible. I would not have had it happen for anything in the world. Did it sound like guilt, or some like innocence? I will tell you, it depended on the ears that heard it. To a man looking for guilt, and with a pair of ears for that purpose, to a man not believing in his fellow man, it sounded like guilt. To a man not suspicious, it would sound like innocence. That is all. Some men are suspicious and cruel in their judgment. Other men are broad and trusting, and kind and charitable to all who live. When you judge the acts of other men, you tell about yourself. That is all there is to it. When I tell you what kind of a man I think some person is, you get an index of my mind. It may be the furthest away in the world from the man I am talking about, but you know what I am, and that is all there is to it. I don't know the exact words that Brown said to me or that I said to Brown, neither does he, but Ford pretends to peddle to you the exact words. I was not there measuring words, nor was he, when we met at that time. I thought a great calamity had overtaken us by the arrest of Franklin. You don't know what you would have said in a case like that. I don't. I will venture to say there isn't any two men on this jury that would have said the same thing, guilty or innocent. And so, about Franklin's bail bond. This evidence that I had furnished $10,000 at the request of Leconte Davis. Davis came to me and told me that he thought Franklin was innocent, and he advised me to give him the money and said he would make good if Franklin ran away. Would you have done it? Lord, I hope you would have done it. If you would not, you would not have been men. I would not want to be tried before 12 men who would not, or be prosecuted by one man who would not. I have no doubt in the world but what Fredericks would have done it. Any man with any feeling in his heart would have done it, and I did it at Davis's request. I had not seen Franklin. In one breath, Ford tells you it was suspicious because I did not do more. In another, it was suspicious because I did so much. Which is it? Did I do too much or did I do too little? True, some of the time when I feared Franklin, I thought of myself, but that was later, not until after the McNamara case was settled. Before that, I had no time to think of myself and no inclination to do so. But when I wondered and thought what I ought to do, I did not know, I could not tell. Do you suppose there ever was a time when I seriously thought of it in my long experience that I did not know what it would mean to have Franklin offered immunity at my expense? And yet I never asked for anything in the matter. I never gave him $1 in that long time, or asked him for a statement or for a word, which I doubtless could have. I never raised my hand with him to save myself, any more than I would with anybody else since this case began or since my life began. And I did it too much here and too little there. Away with it. You can sit here, you 12 men, to pass on my guilt or my innocence and tell me the words I should have spoken or should not have spoken. If you can, you are endowed with the wisdom and omniscience of the Almighty, and I am willing to be judged by that now and hereafter. Now, again, gentlemen, in passing judgment on me, you pass judgment upon yourself. That is all there is to it. If you are so kindly, if you are human, if you are decent, if you love your fellow man, if you believe in him, you will find me innocent. If you feel malicious, if you feel suspicious, if you look upon me as guilty, then find me guilty. I cannot put it any better than that. Now, as to Franklin, it is not a question as to whether his testimony is corroborated, but is it worth anything? Is there a single one of you gentlemen who would condemn your dog upon his word? Is there one of you who would condemn the meanest reptile that crawls upon the word of Franklin, as shown by the testimony in this case? Did he lie when he testified here? Did he lie when he said he had not thought anything about immunity? But I knew that he would get it automatically. Did he lie when he said he was promised nothing? I have said about all I care to about Franklin. I have said enough. I have said too much. I have no feelings against him. He is the way God made him. He can't help it any more than you can help being you, or I can help being I. It was a hard choice he had to make. It is a hard choice for a weak man to offer him honor or comparative honor on the one hand, and security, at least from the penitentiary, on the other. Some men will take one, some will take the other. It depends on the man. He is not responsible for his brain or his skull. I don't want anyone to think that I would judge him with harshness or bitterness. I have never judged any human being that way in my life, and I never shall. I am only asking you, gentlemen of the jury, to consider the reasonableness and the probabilities and the improbabilities and absurdities of his story, nothing else. Would I take a chance of that kind surrounded by detectives from the beginning to the end? Leave out the moral question. Leave out the tradition of a profession that I have followed for 35 years. Leave out everything except the bare chance. Would I take that chance with these gumshoe men everywhere, their eyes on everyone connected with this case? Detectives, 9 of them testifying in this case, detectives over the town as thick as lice in Egypt, detectives everywhere, detectives to the right of me, detectives to the left of me, detectives behind me, sleuthing and spying. Theirs not to question why, theirs but to sleuth and lie. Noble detectives. I hadn't a chance with those fellows, yet I did take a chance. I took the chance of being alive where they were, as every man does, unless he could rely on 12 men to judge him honestly and kindly and carefully, as I feel I can rely on you. Now let me talk a little about Harrington. Do I need to say much about him? A man who came here to work for me, a man who lived in my house, who ate with me and my wife, who slept under my roof, and who stayed for 10 days as our guest. And all the while he was going before Lawler and the grand jury and testifying against me. Against me? Great God, do I need to impeach him? A man sleeping in your house, eating at your table with yourself and your wife, and betraying you? Is there any crime more heinous than that? Would you ever want to look upon Harrington's face again, the man who sat in this courtroom day after day and would not look me in the eye, afraid of being hypnotized? If I started out to hypnotize Harrington, I would want a hunk of corned beef. You would have to get him through his stomach. Did he look at you? Did he look one juror in the eye? Will he ever look a human being in the eye again until he goes down to his unhallowed grave? The dictograph trap. And then, gentlemen, think of the man plotting in Chicago with the Erectors Association, my friend, and asking me for money, meeting these men in a hotel in Chicago and putting up a scheme to trap me into a hotel room where a dictograph, hidden behind a bureau, would record my words. They knew perfectly well then, as they know today, that they could not pick out 12 human beings on the face of the earth that would throw away the liberty of a man upon the testimony of Harrington and Franklin, so they thought to trap me where the hidden dictograph might be made to distort my words. Is there any doubt about that? And Harrington, posing as my friend, came here to lure me into a room where he could secretly record and distort my conversation in order to land me in the penitentiary. Gentlemen, is there a parallel for that in the annals of criminal trials? Let's think of it a moment. Wouldn't it be better that every rogue and rascal in the world should go unpunished than to say that detectives could put a dictograph into your parlor, in your dining room, in your bedroom, and destroy the privacy which alone makes life worth living? What would you think of it? One of you men, if you're hired men, should conceal a dictograph in your home or your office and seek to destroy you in that way. And do you want to tell me that the Erectors Association that would be guilty of a shame like this would not be guilty of plotting my ruin and charging me with a bribery for which they themselves are responsible? I want to say this, that if they deliberately put up a job to catch me on the streets of Los Angeles, that job was a sacrament compared to the hidden dictograph used to trap a man into the penitentiary. They used to have a steer down in the stockyards in Chicago, where Harrington came from, that had been educated. They had educated this steer to the business of climbing an incline to the shambles. There was a little door on the side so that the steer could dart down through this door and not get caught into the shambles. And his business was to go out into the pen and lead the other steers up that incline to the shambles, and then just before they reached that place, he would dodge down through the door and leave the rest to their destruction. That is Harrington. If there is a man on earth who would give credit to Harrington in this matter, I would like to look in the face of that man, and I would find that he was not a man. That is all. Better, I say again, that all the crimes of men could commit should go unpunished than that credit should be given to a scheme like that which was plotted in the Sherman House by Harrington, Lawler, and the Erectors' Association. But what did they get from their infamy? Nothing. I went to Harrington's room, where the dictograph was hidden behind a bureau, and talked with him in a friendly way day after day. But evidently the stenographers in the next room who recorded my language were too honest to distort it. And when I went on the witness stand, Ford asked me if I said this and that, while the dictograph was listening. And all the time they had in their wonderful tin box the full record of my conversation. In that tin box, which contains more infamy than any other box in the world, more infamy and less evidence, infamy practiced by the district attorney's office. And they did not show this infamy to this jury. They did not dare to show it. Would these dictograph reports have shown that I told the truth on the stand, or that Harrington had told the truth? Then they had the effrontery to argue to you that they asked me all they wanted to prove, and my denial of practically every single thing they asked stands unimpeached, and you know it. They asked directly if I did not admit to having received $10,000 in bills from San Francisco. I said no. Where is the wonderful tin box? Where are the listening dictograph operators? Would they have testified for me or for Harrington? Of course, they had to have somebody to help Franklin, and so they threatened Harrington. They placed a charge against him and threatened him with the penitentiary unless he did something for them. And so Harrington comes to the stand, and he lies, and he lies, and he lies. And you 12 men know it. What did he say? There are some links that need filling. Nobody has discovered a single penny that I have spent unlawfully. They have had access to every check I drew. They even photographed the checks in the bank before the bank gave them to me. They have had access to everything I did, and found what? Nothing. A check was given to Mr. Tritemo for a perfectly lawful purpose. It was just as necessary to have money in San Francisco as it was to have money here, and they seized upon that check early in the game. And Harrington tells this story. Look at it a minute. This man Harrington, out of respect for men, I cut out that word. This Harrington, when there is everything to connect, Harrington does it. He found out that a check had been given to Tritemo. And how did he find out? Why, he found it out from a detective. He found it out from the Indianapolis grand jury. He found it out from Burns. He found it out in 10,000 ways. You cannot tell how. He found out that such a check had been given to Tritmo, and he comes on the witness stand and says that I showed him $10,000 in bills on the front porch of my house. Let's see if anybody would believe this story, even if a man told it. He swears that sometime between the 20th and 30th of September, I drew out of my pocket at my house where he was eating. He never missed a chance to eat with me. I presume he would eat with me now if I gave him the chance, and have a dagger somewhere concealed in his clothes, if there was room enough for it after he got through eating. And he swears that I went out on the porch of a house standing up on a hill, the porch brilliantly lighted and houses all around, and with Mrs. Darrow and his daughter out in the walled-in front, and that I pulled out $10,000 from my trousers pocket that I had been carrying for 20 or 30 days, and showed it to him, and told him that I was going to get a couple of jurors with it. Now, is there any sense in that? Any reason in it? Could anybody believe it if he stood alone and uncontradicted in this case, and if a man had sworn to it instead of Harrington? And on the morning of the 28th of November, when I came back from Harrington's room where he was alone, I called him into my room and said, "If Franklin speaks, I am ruined." And that was all. Now think of it. He must have been reading Burns' stories or Nick Carter's. If Franklin speaks, I am ruined. If I said that, just take a chance and send me to the penitentiary. Take a chance. There you are. That is the wonderful corroboration of the most wonderful case that I believe has been tried since men had the right to a jury trial. Testimony of crooks and informers. Franklin says that he had never seen Harrington more than 3 times in his life. But Mrs. Hartenstein, the stenographer who occupied the room between us, swore that they met each other daily. The other stenographer across the hall, who went in often to take dictation, swore that she had seen them together at least 24 times. Mr. Russell swears that he had seen Harrington and Franklin together 15 or 20 times. Is he a liar? I don't know about that. But Harrington is worse. Was Harrington a liar when he lured me to the Hayward Hotel to destroy me with the dictograph trap? Can there be 12 honest men anywhere in Christendom who would believe him? Gentlemen, show me in all their watching and their spying. Show me with all the money they have spent, with all the efforts of the strong and the powerful to get me. Show me in all these long, weary months where one honest man has raised his voice to testify against me. Just one. Just one. And are you ready, gentlemen? Is this the day and generation to take away the name and liberty of a human being upon the testimony of rogues, informers, crooks, vagabonds, immunity hunters, and detectives? Such testimony as have been massed against me. God, if my word and my character did not weigh more than all the trash that has been presented to this jury, I don't want to live. I don't want to live in a world where such men could cause the undoing of an American citizen. If they could, are you safe? Am I safe? Is there any man who is so high and powerful that his life and liberty could be safe? You know better. It cannot happen, and it won't happen. And what else about Harrington? He is contradicted by the 4 witnesses I told you of. He is contradicted by Fremont Older, who came all the way from San Francisco to tell his story, and he told it straight and truthfully. He is my friend, Ford says. He is a liar because he is my friend. I would rather go to the penitentiary and stay there the rest of my life with the friendship of a man like that than to purchase my liberty by betraying my fellow men. Now, let him go. I want to talk to you about one more phase of this case, and the clock's minute hand is moving along as fast as Joe Ford said it was while Hawley was going from his office to Joe Perriman's, so I have no time to loiter. Was there any reason in the world for me seeking to bribe a juror on the 28th day of November? There are two things in this case that are not even disputed. One is that the dictograph contained nothing in the world to my detriment. Here was the place they would have evidence, if there was any honest evidence in the world. They needed it, or they would not have taken the trouble to do such an infamous act. There is another fact in this case that stands out so clear that every human being who has heard it must know it and understand it, and that is that the McNamara case was disposed of, so far as I was concerned, prior to the 28th day of November. Fredericks has said before this jury that he was going to send out for some of the people who formed the committee that made the settlement. Did you see them? He brought Tom Gibbon before you a few minutes one day, and after talking with him, he sent him off on his business. And we haven't seen Mr. Gibbon once. Neither he nor Harry Chandler or any member of that committee has denied a single word of Stephen's testimony that the case was practically settled prior to the 28th. Now, gentlemen, perhaps most of you don't believe in all the philosophy which Lincoln Steffens believes in. What of it? Suppose some evening when you are in your jury room and you being instructed not to talk about this case, get into an argument amongst yourselves about matters of philosophy, and the old question of free will and necessity crops up. I wonder if you will all agree, and if you don't, will you say that the man who disagrees with you is a liar because he has a different philosophy? You won't, not unless your own philosophy is very poor. Suppose you start a little discussion on politics or religions, or who is the best baseball player in America, as you have before now. Will you agree? Not at all, and there may not be one man on this jury who would believe, as Lincoln Steffens believes, as to what we call crime, and what is punishment, and what are social crimes, and what are not. But he is a big man with a broad vision, a man who sees further than most men. World moves toward mercy. Gentlemen, because you don't believe a thing today is no sign that it is not true. There are dreams, and the dreams of today become facts tomorrow. Every effort toward humanizing the world, every effort in dealing with crime and punishment has been toward charity and mercy and better conditions, and has been in the direction of showing that all men are at least partly good and all men are partly bad, and that there isn't much difference in men as we had been taught to believe. Every effort that will last beyond the day and the year must have a humane idea, must have for its purpose the uplifting of man, must have its basis in charity and pity and humanity, or else it cannot live. Lincoln Steffens believes that. You believe it too. You may not believe this way or that, but it is an aspiration that has raised man from the savage drinking the blood of his fellow from his skull, and has led him up through trials and toil and tribulations, by which he has arrived at the place where he can have mercy and charity and justice, and can look forward to an ideal time when there will be no crime and no punishment, no sin, no sorrow, and when man will visit no cruelty upon his fellow men. Almost everything that you believe now was scoffed at and hissed scarcely 100 years ago. Most acts of humanity that we practice today would have been despised and denied 200 years ago. The world is moving, and as it moves, brutality is further off, and humanity is nearer at hand. I don't care for Steffens' views. It is facts that I am interested in. Was my practice humane in this case? Among the other heinous charges that Mr. Ford saw fit to bring against me was that I had betrayed my clients. I, who had almost given my life's blood in their service, I, who never had a client in my life I didn't consider my friend, I, who, under the traditions of the profession and under the feelings of my heart, have put myself in the place of every client I ever served. I, who worked day and night to save those lives that fate had placed in my hands, and who had bared my chest to the hostility of the world to serve them. I betrayed them? Gentlemen, I wish you knew. I wish I could make you understand. I didn't need to do it. I was not on trial then. I was living in peace. It was nothing to me except that I made their case my own. And what happened? It was as if I were a boy walking upon the sand by the sea, and the sky was clear above me, excepting here and there a fleeting cloud, as there always is in every clear sky. The waves were calm and peaceful, and in a moment the heavens fell and the ocean overwhelmed me. If it shall be written in the book of fate that I have not made sacrifice enough for them, well and good. Let me drink the cup to the dregs. Did I think the McNamara case was disposed of? Is there any question but what we began the settlement of the case on the 20th of November? Mr. Ford said I knew these people were guilty from the beginning. Where's the evidence? I did not. I have practiced law for many a year. I do not go to a client and say, "Are you guilty? Are you innocent?" I would not say it to you. Every man on earth is both guilty and innocent. I know it. You may not know it. I know it. I find a man in trouble. In a way, his troubles may have come by his own fault. In a way, they did not. He did not give himself birth. He did not make his own brain. He is not responsible for his ideas. He is the product of all the generations that have gone before. And he is the product of all the people who touch him directly or indirectly through his life. And he is as he is, and the responsibility rests on the infinite God that made him. I do what I can for him, kindly, carefully, and as fairly as I can, and do not call him a guilty wretch. End of Darrow's plea, Part 5, Section 23. Section 24 of Clarence Darrow's Selected Works, 1893 to 1917. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Section 24, Darrow's Plea, Part 6. I had no knowledge whatever about the McNamaras until it was borne in on me day by day that this man I knew, who trusted everything to me, could not be saved if he went to trial. Just as the doctor finds that his patient must die, so it came to me that this client was in deadly peril of his life. Do you think that if I had thought there was one chance in 1,000 to save him, I would not have taken that chance? You may say that I should not, that if I believed he was guilty, I should not have tried to save him. You may say so. I do not. If this man had suffered death, it would have brought more hatred and violence, more wrong and crime than anything else. For, after all, gentlemen, the source of everything is the human heart. You can change a man by changing his heart. You can change him by changing his point of view. You cannot change him by scaring him, by putting him in the pen, by violence and cruelty. If you look on him as a doctor looks upon his patient, and ascertain the cause of his conduct, then you may change him. These acts of violence will occur over and over and over again until the human race is wise enough to bring more justice and more equality to the affairs of life than has ever obtained before. The men who built civilization. And let me tell you about these acts that grow from social conflict. The men who stand for the workers strike out in their blindness. True, they strike out in the night and often wrongly. These men who built the civilization which we enjoy, these men who have built the railroad bed and laid the tracks, and who man the locomotives when you and I ride peacefully across the country in Pullman cars, these men who go 10, 20, and 30 stories in the air to the tops of the high buildings, taking their lives in their hands, and whose mangled remains are so often found on the earth beneath. These are the men who have built our civilization, and let me say to you that every step in the progress of the race, every step in the world has been for the elevation of the poor. There is no civilization without it. There can be no civilization without it. The progress of the world means the raising of these through organization, through treating them better, through treating them kindlier, through treating them more justly. Every step in civilization means the elevation of the poor, means helping the weak and the oppressed, and don't ever let yourself think that though these people often do wrong, that they are blind, rebellious, and riotous, that after all, they are not doing their part and more in the progress of the world. I knew it. I felt it then. I knew that though terrible were the consequences of this blind act, consequences which nobody foresaw, still it was one of those inevitable acts which are part of a great industrial war. I believe that the loss of life was an accident. Nobody meant to take human life in the time's disaster, and the position of the state in the settlement of the matter showed that nobody meant to take human life. I heard these men talk of their brothers and their mothers, of the dead. I saw their human side. I wanted to save them, and I did what I could to save them, and I did it as honestly and devotedly and unselfishly as I ever did an act in my life, and I have nothing to regret, however hard it has been. Gradually it has come to me that a trial could not succeed. Gradually another thing came to me. It was expensive. The money of the Erectors Association and the state of California, the power of the Burns Agency, everything was against us. It needed money on our side, and a great deal of it. It needed money that must be taken from the wages of men who toil, men whose cause I have always served, and whether they are all faithful to me or not, the cause, that I will serve to the end. I could not say to them that my clients would be convicted. I could not say to the thousands who believed in them and who believed in me that the case was hopeless. The secrets that I had gained were locked in my breast, and I had to act with the men whom I had chosen to act with me. I had to take the responsibility, grave as it was, and I took it. Was this case disposed of before Franklin was arrested? Why, gentlemen, there is no more question about that than there is that you 12 men are in front of me. Lincoln Steffens testified that on the 20th day of November, after he and I came from San Diego, he made the proposition for a settlement to me. The idea grew out of a conversation he had with Mr. Scripps, and I said I wished it could be done, but I said, if anything is done, it must come from you. On that very day he went to Meyer Listener and Thomas Gibbon. At first I had so little confidence in the possibility of a settlement that I scarcely thought about it for a day or two. But soon Mr. Steffens brought back reports which gave me the confidence to wire my friend, Mr. Older, and ask his advice. All the leading men connected with the labor movement on this coast were then in Atlanta. I could not get to them. I had to take the responsibility, and the other lawyers had to take it with me. What else could we do? I could not consider politics. I could not even consider my own interests. I had to consider those accused men, nothing else. And there isn't one of you 12 men who would ever hire a lawyer who you didn't believe would consider your interests first of all. And if he did not, he wouldn't be true to his profession or true to his own manhood. Those things alone I consider. I wired on Wednesday the 22nd. I wired to Fremont Older, and I wired to Gompers to send me a man at once, and I named certain men, and Mr. Older came down here on Wednesday morning. Now, is that all a lie? Did I wire to these men on that day? If so, why? Ford says I might have got up all this scheme so as to cover up a case of jury bribing. Well, I might. Sometime his bitter heart might be touched by feelings of kindness and charity. It might, if the days of miracles have not passed. And so I might have got up this elaborate scheme because I foresaw that I was going to give Franklin $4,000 on the next Tuesday morning and start him off with the money to bribe a juror. Why, gentlemen, I might have done it, and therefore you will argue, says Ford, that I did. And this is a civilized country, at least, presumed to be. The McNamara Settlement. Older and Davis and Stephens and I met together. Was I betraying my clients? Davis spoke up and said to me, Mr. Darrow, you can't afford to do it. Judge McNutt was there. He was as fine a man as ever lived in the world, as loyal to me as any friend I have ever known, as true to his profession and as true to the higher ideals of manhood as any man I have ever met. Davis said, You will be misunderstood by union labor. I told him I had no right to consider myself. I had no right to consider the men who furnished the money. My duty was over there in the county jail with these two men, whose lives depended upon my courage and my fidelity and my judgment. Whatever befell me, I must be true to them, and no lawyer lives who is true to his profession and true to himself who ever hesitates in an emergency like this. McNutt at once agreed with me. Davis went to the district attorney, and this is uncontradicted. The first proposition that came from Listener and Stephens was that J.B. McNamara should plead guilty and that all other prosecutions would stop. Davis then went over to the district attorney and brought back word that it would require a term of years at least for J.J. McNamara. That was discussed on Wednesday, November 22nd, between Older and Davis and Stephens and myself. And Judge McNutt is dead, says Mr. Ford. I couldn't help it. If the angel of death hovering around the courtroom had come and asked my advice, I probably would have told him, take Ford and spare McNutt. But he didn't. I cannot help it because the angel of death made a mistake. This matter was considered on Wednesday. Stephens said that he would see that the original proposition went through, and he went back to Chandler, the manager of the Times. Chandler was meeting with Stephens, and then word came from the East. From the East? From the seat of money and power and wealth and monopoly, word came that it was not enough to take J.B., but that J.J. must plead guilty to something. And we worked on that. We worked on it the rest of the week, and Stephens swears that he went and interviewed those defendants. Each brother was willing to suffer himself, but J.J. didn't want his brother to be hanged, and J.B. didn't want J.J. to plead guilty to anything. J.B. agreed to plead guilty and take a life sentence, and J.J. said to us that after his brother's case was out of the way, he would plead guilty and take a 10 years sentence. Ford said that I should have told J.B. that J.J. was to plead guilty. Why? I was defending J.B., and it was my business to get the best terms I could for him. I was also defending J.J., and it was my business to get the best terms I could for him. I had no right to play one against the other, no right, let alone what a man would naturally do. Now, that was the condition going back and forth before Saturday. We had agreed to accept the district attorney's terms if no better terms could be had. On Saturday, when that jury list was drawn, it was not handed over to Franklin for him to look up the missing names. It was kept until night, until he himself called to me for it, and I gave it to him. There was nothing else to do. In the face of the world and in the face of our employee, we were bound to go on as we had. On Sunday, Stephens, McNutt, and I spent most of the day at the jail, where, finally, each of the brothers separately agreed with our plan. On Sunday night, McNutt called Davis to his house and told him that the McNamaras had agreed to our plan. Now, gentlemen, what is there against all that? Anything but the breath of counsel? Nothing. The testimony as to the settlement of the McNamara case stands here clear as sunlight. On Monday morning, Mr. Davis went to Fredericks, and Fredericks agreed that he would accept the pleas of guilty. J.B. to take life, and J.J. 10 years. Now, what about it, gentlemen? Is all this a lie? Is it another dream? Why, even Franklin doesn't testify against this. If they had got Franklin and Harrington to contradict it, then they might argue that I had some motive on the 28th of November for seeking to bribe a juror. But nobody testifies against it. Fredericks doesn't deny it. Chandler doesn't deny it. Nor Listener, nor Gibbon. There is no denial. In the meantime, I had received a telegram from Ed Knuckles on Friday, and in reply I wired him to come immediately. Was that dispatch a fake? Was it sent to cover up a case of jury bribing at the beginning of the next week? On Monday, every one of the parties interested had formally agreed to the plan of settlement. We had agreed to it on Sunday. We had agreed to it on Saturday. And we were still trying to do better if we could. Davis told us that the settlement must be made at once. And with this condition of affairs, when I had no thought whatever that the McNamara case would be tried, is it likely that on Tuesday morning I would take $4,000, not of my own money, but of money that was sorely needed, and not only waste that money, but take a chance of the destruction of my life and a term of years in the penitentiary by sending Franklin down to the corner of 3rd and Main Streets to bribe a juror? Gentlemen, if you can believe it, I do not know what your minds are made of. If there is anybody whose prejudice and hatred are so deep that they cannot be removed, who can believe a thing like that? I would like to search him with an X-ray, look inside his skull, and see how the wheels go round. The settlement of the McNamara case cost me many friends that have been coming back slowly, very slowly, as more and more of this matter is understood. I am not a fool. I can prove that by Ford. I knew I was losing friends. Was I saving myself? Can any man on this jury or any person point to a single place in this whole matter where I ever sought to save myself? Was I trying to save myself when Stephens came to me after Franklin's arrest and asked me if the settlement could still be made? And I said it could. And then he turned to me and said, someone may think that some of you lawyers are connected with this Franklin matter. And I said to him promptly, if anybody has suspicions of anything like that, you tell them for me that this matter is never to be in any way considered in disposing of the McNamara case. Let the law take its course in that. And have I ever haggled or bargained or sought to throw myself into the balance anywhere? I was thinking of my clients, not of myself. You may pursue me with all the infamy and venom you wish, but I know in my inmost heart that in all the sacrifices and responsibilities I have taken in my life, I never made one so hard as this, gentlemen. With the eyes of the world upon me, knowing that my actions would call down the doubt and in many cases the condemnation of my friends, I never hesitated for the fraction of a second. Perhaps if I had hesitated, my flesh would have been too weak to have taken the responsibility. But I took it, and here I am, gentlemen, and I am not now trying to get rid of the responsibility. Was it wise or unwise? Was it right or wrong? You might have done differently. I don't know. I have been a busy man. I've never had to look for clients. They have come to me. I have been a general attorney of a big railroad. I have been the attorney several times and general counsel, as it were, of the great city of Chicago. I have represented the strong and the weak, but never the strong against the weak. I have been called into a great many cases for labor unions. I have been called into a great many arbitration cases. I believe if you went to my native town, that the rich would tell you that they could trust not only my honor, but my judgment and my sense of justice and fairness. More than once have they left their disputes with the laboring men with me to settle, and I have settled them as justly as I could without giving the working man as much as he ought to have. It will be many and many a long year before he will get all he ought to have. That must be reached step by step, but every step means more in the progress of the world. Society in open rupture. This McNamara case came like a thunderclap upon the world. What was it? A building had been destroyed and 20 lives had been lost. It shocked the world. Whether it was destroyed by accident or by violence, no one knew, yet everyone had an opinion. How did they form that opinion? Everybody who sympathized with the corporations believed it was dynamite. Everyone who sympathized with the working man believed it was something else. All had opinions. Society was again in open rupture. Upon the one hand, all the powerful forces thought, now we have these men by the throat, and we will strangle them to death. Now we will reach out the strong arm of money and the strong arm of the law, and we will destroy the labor unions of America. On the other hand were the weak and the poor and the workers whom I had served. These were rallying to the defense of the unions and to the defense of their homes. They called on me. I did not want to go. I urged them to take someone else, but I had to lay aside my own preferences and take the case. There was a direct cleavage in society. Upon the one hand, those who hated unions, upon the other, those who loved them. The fight was growing fiercer and bitterer day by day. It was a class struggle, gentlemen of the jury, filled with all the venom and bitterness born of a class struggle. These two great contending armies were meeting in almost mortal combat. No one could see the end. I have loved peace all my life. I have taught it all my life. I believe that love does more than hatred. I believe that both sides have gone about the settlement of these difficulties in the wrong way. The acts of the one have caused the acts of the other, and I blame neither. Men are not perfect, and they had an imperfect origin, and they were imperfect today, and the long struggle of the human race from darkness to comparative civilization has been filled with clash and discord and murder and war and violence and wrong, and it will be for years and years to come. But ever we are going onward and upward to the sunshine, where the hatred and war and cruelty and violence of the world will disappear. Men were arrayed here in two great forces, the rich and the poor. None could see the end. They were trying to cure hate with hate. I know I could have tried the McNamara case, and that a large class of the working people of America would honestly have believed, if these men had been hanged, that they were not guilty. I could have done this and have saved myself. I could have made money had I done this, if I had wanted to get money in that way. I know if you had hanged these men and other men, you would have changed the opinion of scarcely a man in America, and you would have settled in the hearts of a great mass of men a hatred so deep, so profound, that it would never die away. And I took the responsibility, gentlemen. Maybe I did wrong, but I took it, and the matter was disposed of and the question set at rest. Here and there I got praise for what was called an heroic act, although I did not deserve the praise, for I followed the law of my being. That was all. I acted out of the instincts that were within me. I acted according to the teachings of the parents who reared me, and according to the life I had lived. I did not deserve praise, but where I got one word of praise, they got 1,000 words of blame, and I have stood under that for nearly a year. This trial has helped clear up the McNamara case. It will all finally be cleared up, if not in time for me to profit by it, in time for my descendants to know. Sometime we will all know the truth, but I have got on about my way as I always have, regardless of this, without explanation, without begging, without asking anything of anybody who lived, and I will go on that way to the end. I know the mob. In one way I love it, in another way I despise it. I know the unreasoning, unthinking mass. I have lived with men and worked with them. I have been their idol, and I have been cast down and trampled beneath their feet. I have stood on the pinnacle, and I have heard the cheering mob sound my praises. And I have gone down to the depths of the valley, where I have heard them hiss my name. This same mob, but I have summoned such devotion and such courage as God has given me, and I have gone on my path, unmoved by their hisses or their cheers. Praise and blame are unjust. I have tried to live my life and to live it as I see it, regarding neither praise nor blame, both of which are unjust. No man is judged rightly by his fellow men. Some look upon him as an idol and forget that his feet are clay, as are the feet of every man. Others look upon him as a devil and can see no good in him at all. But neither is true. I have known this, and I have tried to follow my conscience and my duty to the best I could and to do it faithfully. And here I am today, in the hands of you 12 men who will one day say to your children, and they will say to their children, that you passed on my fate. Gentlemen, there is not much more to say. You may not agree with all my views of philosophy. I believe we are all in the hands of destiny, and if it is written in the book of destiny that I shall go to the penitentiary, that you 12 men before me shall send me there, I will go. If it is written that I am now down to the depths, and that you 12 men shall liberate me, then so it will be. We go here and there, and we think we control our destinies and our lives, but above us and beyond us and around us are unseen hands and unseen forces that move us at their will. I am here, and I can look back to the forces that brought me here, and I can see that I had nothing whatever to do with it, and could not help it any more than any of you 12 men had to do with or could help passing on my fate. There is not one of you that would have wished to judge me, unless you could do it in a way to help me in my sore distress. I know that. We have little to do with ourselves. As one poet has expressed it, life is a game of whist. From unknown success, the cards are shuffled and the hands are dealt. Behind are our efforts to control the forces that, though unseen, are no less strongly felt. I do not like the way the cards are shuffled, but still I like the game and want to play. And through the long, long night I play unruffled the cards I get until the break of day. I have taken the cards as they came. I have played the best I could. I have tried to play them honestly, manfully, doing for myself and for my fellow man the best I could. And I will play the game to the end, whatever that end may be. Gentlemen, I came to this city a stranger. Misfortune has beset me, and I never saw a place in my life with greater warmth and kindness and love than Los Angeles. Here to a stranger have come hands to help me, hearts to beat with mine, words of sympathy and courage and cheer. And though a stranger to you 12 men, and a stranger to the city, I'm willing to leave my case with you. I know my life. I know what I have done. My life has not been perfect. It has been human, too human. I have felt the heartbeats of every man who lived. I have tried to be the friend of every man who lived. I have tried to help in the world. I have not had malice in my heart. I have had love for my fellow men. I have done the best I could. There are some people who know it. There are some who do not believe it. There are people who regard my name as a byword and a reproach, more for the good I have done than for the evil. There are people who would destroy me. There are people who would lift up their hands to crush me down. I have enemies powerful and strong. There are honest men who misunderstand me and doubt me, and still I have lived a long time on earth, and I have friends. I have friends in my old home who have gathered around to tell you as best they could of the life I have lived. I have friends who have come to me here to help me in my sore distress. I have friends throughout the length and breadth of the land, and these are the poor and the weak and the helpless to whose cause I have given voice. If you should convict me, there will be people to applaud the act. But if in your judgment and your wisdom and your humanity you believe me innocent and return a verdict of not guilty in this case, I know that from thousands and tens of thousands, and yea, perhaps millions, of the weak and the poor and the helpless throughout the world will come thanks to this jury for saving my liberty and my name. End of Darrow's Plea, Section 24, Part 6. End of Clarence Darrow, Selected Works, 1893 to 1917.